So the nativity scene, the birth of Jesus, moves next to the visit of the three magi, three kings coming to honor the new baby. Then the flight into Egypt, in which Joseph, Mary, and baby Jesus are fleeing to Egypt in order to escape a decree that all male infants of a certain age will be massacred. And that massacre is shown in this scene with the king who has ordered the massacre looking down at the executioners. This scene of Jesus in the temple shows him as a child who is capable of conversing with adults on theological matters. The painting is sadly very damaged by water encroachment, so it's really hard to see what it would have originally looked like. Here, St. John the Baptist baptizes Jesus. And the first of the miracles that Jesus performs, water turned into wine. The miracle of Lazarus raised from the dead. Jesus entering into Jerusalem to confront his fate to suffer and die on the cross. This has also been damaged somewhat. The blues are the areas where the damage can be seen. Ironically, blue is incredibly expensive, and the reason that the blue has been damaged is that the patron Scrovegni, Enrico Scrovegni, stipulated that Giotto should use the dry fresco technique, where you apply the wet paint onto a dry wall. But this was actually a mistake on Scrovegni's part. It is much better to apply wet paint into wet plaster, because then the paint binds chemically to the plaster and is very strongly adhered, unified with the wall. The dry method unfortunately leads to it chipping off. Scrovegni wanted to preserve the expensive pigment with that method. Turning from that fact, though, about the material, we see people pulling off clothing to lay down and create a kind of carpet, like a king's carpet, to honor Jesus as he rides a donkey into the city. Jesus driving the moneylenders, the sinners, out of the temple. Jesus sharing the Last Supper with his 12 disciples as he prepares to accept his devastating fate. The washing of the feet. The scene of the kiss of Judas, which the textbook discusses, which is when Judas, who has received money to betray Jesus, signals to the soldiers by embracing Jesus. And Peter cuts off the ear of a soldier. The four scenes discussed in the textbook. Moving forward, Christ arrested, his hands tied, brought before a Roman administrative official, Caiaphas, who rends his garment, a traditional symbol of distress, grief, anger. Jesus being psychologically and physically tormented, mocked, cruelly abused as he is now a prisoner. And then once again, we have a painting that's been seriously abraded by water damage, the carrying of the cross. And we see Mary gazing at her son. This is a close-up of her facial expression. The next scene shows the crucifixion with the angels crying out in grief, and one rends its garments, just like we saw. The scene of the lamentation, lamenting, grieving the dead Christ. And then the scene of resurrection at the tomb where Jesus' body had been lain. It was guarded by soldiers who sleep, and Mary Magdalene reaches out. He reaches back and tells her, "Noli me tangere," Latin for "do not touch me," for he is no longer human. And then the ascension into heaven. And the final scene closes with the disciples wearing halos, receiving the golden divine inspiration to act as the messengers, the evangelists of Jesus.